Welcome back. Hi, John. Hello, Jennifer. Thank you. I was stuck here in the main room. I did not get to participate because if I move into a breakout room, the recording follows me. Good. So welcome back, everybody. It gave me an opportunity to catch up with the chat. Okay. So let me go back to my slides. And let's get started here. So one of the things that was also unique about you as an audience was that in the, so we did this, that in the comments on Perusall, there were many, sort of interesting comments praising Perusall, which is of course great to hear. But there's something unique about those statements. I have one from Leslie Broder. I don't know if you're here, Leslie.
Here.
Yes, you're there. Great. Well, thank you. She wrote, this tool is especially useful now that students are remote. They crave the social interactions they provide. It also encourages accountability. I want to pause for a moment about the social interactions. I mean, we saw that sort of in your answers too, not the craving, but the fact that that it made the pre-assignment so much more useful, right? 40% of the people benefited from the pre-assignment because of the interaction with others. And then Paula Gutierrez, I saw you earlier when I had all of the videos in front of me, said, brilliant, I used Perusall for the first time this semester in my advanced Spanish classes. And my students and I loved it. It was amazing to see the conversation students started here, the range of topics, the quality of the comments, and the engagement. I'm out to learn more about these future. I haven't used that because I will be using Perusall always in the future, online or in person. That's great. Of course, I mean, when I came up with the idea for Perusall, it was really to teach that. I had in the opening slide, I had a picture of my current course, which is a team and project-based course, in a room where you cannot lecture. And I wanted to find a solution for once and for all for the out-of-class components when I came up with the idea of making it social. So it was really not designed for the pandemic or anything. It was designed way before the pandemic. And then when the pandemic hit, I noticed the same thing. It was truly a wonderful way of creating a community of learners in a time of social isolation. And another comment, which also mentions the students, that's why I wanted to highlight these three comments, was from Monica Ankahan, who said, now that the semester is at an end, I asked my students for feedback on Perusall since it was my and the response was nearly unanimously very enthusiastic. That's absolutely phenomenal. And in the early days of Perusall, that was not always true, and it was in part because we had not really struck the right balance in terms of assessment and scoring. And I think right now that's much better than it was before. So I am absolutely delighted to hear that, and I urge everybody to actually survey their students and find out what the students think, because ultimately, if it doesn't work for the students, it's very unlikely to work for us. Okay, so I've divided the comments into two categories, a category that dealt with pedagogy and one that dealt with technology. For me, the pedagogy is much more important than the technology. So I'm going to start with the pedagogy, and then we'll talk about the technology. I mean, technology is important too. That's why we're here for, to see how to best use this technology to support the pedagogy. But I want to first get the pedagogical issues out of the way. And in pedagogy, there were sort of two main themes. There were more. I've replied to some of you directly online because I couldn't possibly incorporate all of your great questions in this online session. And those two categories are motivating the students. How do we get the students to do this? And secondly, what is the involvement of the instructor, both in the online platform and in general when using Perusall?
I'm not sure I understand.
So let's start with my iPad, thinking I'm talking to her. So I'll start with motivating the students. Wade James said, what if students do not read the material before attending live class? Wade noticed that about 40% of the people who are here, I think it was 40%, I forgot, maybe it was 30, did not read before coming to quote unquote class. I am not going to reenact the video that you saw or read the paper or summarize the content of the paper. And I think I would very much urge you to do the same thing. What is the system of positive negative reinforcement used to motivate students to pre-engage with the material? So I think that if I had now said, oh my God, 40% of you have not done the pre-assignment, let me quickly tell you what's in the pre-assignment, I would have actually given positive reinforcement to those who did not get prepared and negative reinforcement to those who did prepare, which is why I'm not doing that. Now, in terms of Perusall, when we designed Perusall, I wanted to have, ideally, I want people to participate completely for intrinsic reasons. Completely for intrinsic reasons, because I think that gets students to put in their best effort and to do it not because there's a carrot and a stick, but to do it because there's an intrinsic benefit to it. Most of you, took this very seriously. I mean, even now, there's dozens of you who are online on Perusall. And, there was no carrot and no stick. After the session, your salary is not going to be affected. Nothing is going to change. You did it because you were interested in doing it. And maybe even you started to find it fun to interact with others and get reminded to do your assignment, or to get an email saying, hey, such and such has replied to your question that you posed. So ideally, I'd like it to be purely for intrinsic reasons. And as you saw, the majority of you were intrinsically motivated to participate. Now, we all know that is not necessarily the case with students. I read a number of comments of people who don't attach any points to the reading and perusal. Good for you. When I teach a graduate course, or when I teach a small seminar-based course to juniors and seniors, I don't have any extrinsic motivation. I purely use intrinsic motivation. And in a sense, the intrinsic motivations are twofold. One is students very quickly discover that if they prepare themselves, they get more out of class. And also, if they get online, they get this social connection with their other students. So rather than spending time interacting with others on Facebook, so to speak, they can interact with others in Perusall and maybe have a casual conversation, maybe have a more interesting conversation about the content. And I think that intrinsic motivation is really important. The next one is a very subtle one. It's one where the pre-assignment, where you reveal to the students the connection between the pre-assignment and the in-class activity. For example, or I forward to the next slide, Wade and the others who I mentioned, Leslie, Paula, and Monica, may thought, wow, we actually read our comments. And there were hundreds of comments, okay? The same thing happens with my students. I show some of their comments and they discover very quickly that if they have a good question and they post it online, either one of their classmates may comment and answer, or I, as the instructor, may focus on the question in class. So it makes a stronger connection between the pre-assignment and the in-class activity. Vani Vasuvedan said, what happens if there is very little participation of confusion? How to tell if the students, I guess that's an if the students are simply going through the reading motions versus everything really being clear? I think that's a very good question. And I don't have an answer because frankly, I find that in my classes, I rarely, if any, no, I don't run into that problem. There's always too much participation and too much confusion to address. But I know that in our group here, there are a lot of people who are already using Perusall. So why don't you raise your hand if you have advice for Vani, because I would love to hear from some other people as well. So raise your hand or just unmute your microphone. That's fine too. What would your advice be to Vani?
Something that I've been doing, if I want to check for certain understanding in certain points, is putting questions in the margins or putting questions in the, like posting a question on Perusall for students to respond to, and then asking everyone to respond to those specific points.
That's actually excellent. I'm so glad I didn't think of that myself. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that, Vince. In fact, when we were doing that research that you read about, the article, I don't think this is in the article. This was in Kelly Miller's thesis. But just so you know, Perusall came out of the PhD research that one of my PhD students did in my class. I mean, we didn't set out to develop a product or anything. No, we wanted to see if through social annotation we could get the students to better engage in a pre-assignment in my class, and therefore redesign the activities in the classroom around that. So one of the things that she did, Vince, thank you for reminding me of that, is that she looked if by actually preceding, not preceding as the word precede, but preceding as in sewing, putting questions in the reading, you could, if that would affect the quality of the dialogue, of the discourse on Perusall. So what we did is, from after the first year, we took the best questions from that first year, and then we made up fictitious students. My class was large enough that if we made up, 6 students who were not really in the class names, students wouldn't notice it. And we put these annotations in there already, questions. And we found that the presence of those good questions actually elevated the overall level of the dialogue. When we designed Perusall, we couldn't really think of a good way of doing that, because let's say that an instructor has only 10 students and all of a sudden 6 fictitious students show up. I think that would be a bit weird. But I've heard from a number of instructors, and I've always wanted to do that in my own class after this first experiment. We never got around to do it, but I've heard of a number of instructors who put marginal questions or their own questions in the reading. Great idea, Vince. So Vani, that's one thing that you may want to try if you ever run into this problem of little participation of confusion. I don't know if Vani's actually here. No, he's not here. It's too bad, because it would be good, but maybe other people benefit from this answer too. So I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this name correctly. Shimen or Chimene Gechevich said, any suggestion on the best way to explain the grading to the students? So now we go from the intrinsic part to the extrinsic part, right? And initially, when we get to technology, one thing I want to discuss is scoring. And I put this question initially on the scoring, but I thought, no, this is really pedagogy, right? How do you explain it? And I found, and we've had a discussion, a number of people who are here in the webinar online beforehand, is I try to be rather vague about it. In fact, right now, the grading system is so complicated, I don't even know how to explain it to you, frankly. It looks at a lot of engagement metrics. In fact, the research for that article informed the current, what we call holistic scoring scheme. So we basically looked at which online behaviors correlated to better in-class performance. And we found things that some are obvious and other are maybe not that obvious, but ultimately make a lot of sense. For example, students who start earlier benefit more than students who do the reading at the last minute. Yeah, you get more time to process it, you get more time to interact with others, you get more time to ask questions and have them answered before class. If you take 2 students who spend exactly the same amount of time, I 1 hour, you 1 hour, but I spent the 1 hour in one chunk and you chunk it in 6 10-minute bits, correcting for all other variables, you do better, statistically significantly better in the course than I do. Again, that makes sense because I don't have much opportunity to interact with others. I can pose questions, but since I don't come back, I may not even see the answers to those questions. Whereas if you do it in pieces, A, you get more time to process the information, and B, there's way more opportunity to interact with others. Students who ask questions that trigger follow-up and answers from others do better. Then why not encourage students to display that behavior? And you may have seen when you were online these periodic reminders, right? Ask more questions, upvote other questions, try to post questions that get upvoted. So in a sense, you know, the other benefit to that is that that is inherently hard to game, which gets back to the question that Vanu was asking, right? I mean, just going through the motions versus really reading. I mean, if you have to start early, the only way to do that is to start early. There's no way of gaming that. And coming back often, same thing. So I think that the current scoring system is way more robust than what we had a year ago before we rolled this out. And I've seen significantly more engagement, meaningful engagement, I should say, this past year. So Brandon Anderson, I'd like to learn how to inspire students to really engage with the material, especially first year students that don't really know how to engage with college level text. So, I mean, the way I do it is not very different from the way I did it with you. I have a short video, which is very similar to the video you saw. And I slowly sort of suck the students into Perusall. But I'd love to hear if anybody else who has used Perusall has additional words of wisdom to add to answer Brennan's question. Feel free to either just unmute yourself. Oh, and one little thing, you may want to briefly introduce yourself, where you're from and what you're teaching, so we get to know each other.
Hi, I'm Monica Angelucci, and I teach composition at Glendale Community College in Arizona. For me, I don't know if it's easier or more difficult, but I think that Perusall has to be linked and necessary to a particular project, and that's the way that I use it. We do literary analysis of speeches, and I can put students in maybe a group of 5 who are analyzing one specific speech and looking at rhetorical devices and pulling those pieces out, annotating as they go and assisting each other. But I also, as far as grading, we use Canvas. I will, outside of Perusall, ask specific questions like, you know, in this literary analysis done by XYZ, you know, what, you know, are the 3 most powerful rhetorical devices that JFK uses or Martin Luther King uses to, you know, to create power around it. And so, and ultimately their final paper is a literary analysis of a different speech. And, you know, so it kind of, you know, it almost, you know, carrot stick, but I mean, I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, it forces them to want to engage in it, to have to engage in it, to, you know, to get their points to engage in it. But again, I think there always needs to be a very specific purpose for why you are asking them to read something. And I think it should be leading towards, you know, another space, a bigger space. And I think students need to understand and see the value of it.
Thank you, Monica. It's really interesting, and it's also interesting to see, as somebody who is in the sciences, to hear this perspective from somebody in the humanities. So that was very useful. Anybody from the sciences who would like to pitch in here?
I teach geography, which kind of crosses science, social science, and I teach first year students, so they're still, I think, like Brennan was saying, first year students not really knowing how to engage with college text. And I started using Perusall for the first time this semester. Before I was using that, I was working on reading strategies with them. So when they were reading, they were doing annotations, but by hand, and noting things like their annotations would involve things like making links, making predictions, asking questions. And so when I started using Perusall, I taught those same strategies to students. And so when they're making their annotations, they might link what they're reading to a personal experience. They might link it to a YouTube video they'd seen. They might link it to something they'd learn in another course. So the same reading strategies that, I mean, there's lots of literature on reading strategies. I just guided them to use those when making their annotations. And it worked really well. Students definitely got it.
That's wonderful to hear. Thank you, Natalie, for that comment. So let's go to the next item that falls under the heading pedagogy, or I put it on the heading pedagogy. Carolyn Plump asked, I saw Carolyn earlier, but I think she dropped off. I'm noticing that some people have connection problems. Yes, she's not here right now. Do you recommend instructors hold off commenting immediately to allow students to engage in dialogue? I have found that in other platforms, discussion boards, and so on, if I jump in too quickly, students may simply wait for my response. On the other hand, I want students to know I'm present and reading their comments. What do you recommend? So, so let's take that last part first. I want students to know I'm present and reading their comments. Do you have the impression that I read your comments by now? I mean, you don't need to answer, but ponder that question for a moment. I think the answer is yes, right? I mean, I've tried very hard to let you know that I read your comments, and maybe I've even highlighted one of your comments, which will certainly have reinforced that feeling. So what I'm trying to say is you don't need to jump in order to make it clear to students that you're there reading. I definitely recommend holding off commenting, because I have found exactly the same thing. If the instructor, other than what Vince said earlier, right? Vince said, you know, maybe you can put in some guiding question first, but that's different from jumping in on top of existing questions. So other than placing questions before the students come on, I would say hold off, because if you start answering students' questions, or even worse, correcting questions, you essentially stifle the discussion. Because, you know, students are going to say, well, I'd rather not make a fool of myself. I'm going to wait for, you know, Professor Mazur to answer this question. And you can see that it sort of terminates the interaction and the discussion. And to get back to the last part, I mean, if you see things that you want to react to, bring them to the classroom. That gives that connection between the online and the in class, whether the class is virtual or not, activity. And Martina Schmid said, I wonder if managing a Perusall assignment in a class with high enrollments, let's say 100 students or more, would be difficult. Can it be completely automated? Would students expect instructor feedback? Great question, and I want to first of all say my class is about 100 students, and we have a number of instructors who are using it with classes of 700 or more students. Michael, what's right now our largest class that we have on Perusall? I have no clue, frankly, myself, but you might know.
Around 700 or 800 students. 700 or
800. So 100 is not an exception. So and right now this workshop is one of there are 153 people here, and there were more than that enrolled. So let me show you how I prepared myself. Right. So oops, pardon me. So I'm going to share Perusall rather than my slides. I need to move this away here. Where is Perusall? Right there. So what I did starting this morning was go to, and you see now the instructor view of the course. So for those of you, by the way, for those of you who made a student account, we'll give you instructions in a moment how to convert your student account into an instructor account. But I could see the two assignments that you did, the video assignment and the text assignment. Right now, the video assignment is selected, and you can see there are 162 comments. Yeah, I can look at the analytics. I mean, let's just very quickly look at that. It shows that, you know, there's a lot of room for improvement in the scores. And we can see when most of the activity was. So look at that. I announced the course, I think, at the end of October. So there were already some people, a few percent, who did the assignment very, very early on. But as you can see, the bulk of them came in right at the last, you know, the last few hours of the assignment. Although, look here, a few days ago, the weekend was a good opportunity for many people to work on. But anyway, that's not, I hadn't looked at it. That's not how I prepared myself. I prepared myself by first looking at this very page. What are the most upvoted annotations? And as you can see, I did copy this. This is when I first saw somebody who was, Paula, who was very positive about Perusall and who commented on the students. So I actually copied it. So I started by looking at upvoted annotations, and I did the same thing for the article, where, you know, we have about 500 comments, and the average reading time is half an hour, as you can see. Question about the grading algorithm. Well, we'll actually look at Amanda's question later on when I talk about technology. So I started by looking at this, and the next thing I did, and I copied and pasted some of these questions. It's very easy. So, for example, Amanda's question, I essentially clicked on this little button here, copy to clipboard, and then I put it in my slide. And then, you know, if I want to know the name of the person, I just hover over the icon. And then the other thing I did was to look at this confusion report, and you may find this useful or not. It's, you know, sometimes it works way better than other times. It actually looks at the clustering of questions. So here, there's a cluster of questions that deal either through the text itself or through the question with the concept of students and Perusall, reading and highlighting. And then there's the third cluster, student comments. So I essentially looked for each of these clusters at the questions, and, you know, you get sort of 3 exemplar questions, but if you click more, you can see more of them. Here again, 3 exemplar questions. If I click show more, I can see more. So I looked at all of these questions, and I got a reasonable feel of the type of questions that people had. If that does not yield sufficient, you know, material for your class, what you can do is you can open the reading assignment and then click on these all conversations. And then I can see which comments are questions that have not been answered yet. So, for example, this one here has no check mark. So I could click on it, and I see that Karen Valerius asked, I'm curious, are people using Perusall in concert with some other learning management system, let's say Blackboard? Or is Perusall the sole platform for the course? We'll get actually to that. I don't know when this was posted, but I missed that. Oh, here we go, 12:45. No, I was already getting ready for the online session at that time. So Karen, I'm sorry I missed your question, but we will talk about LMS integration in just a few minutes. Theron, you have your hand raised.
Yes. How does Perusall know what is a question and what is an answer or a comment? I found that things I posted as one appeared as the other.
Okay, so it tries to do a best guess. Let's actually go to Perusall. So if you have a question mark in your comments, so let me highlight something. So if you type why is this question mark, it will automatically tag it as a question. I think even if you omit let me actually omit the whole thing. Where's the delete button? There's the delete button. Okay, so let me make another one. Oh, there's the question without, it still knows because of the word why, it knows this is a question. So it's smart enough is that. How can this be? I don't know if it without a question mark. It knows that's a question too. But sometimes it will miss that. I can't think of a way of asking a question without making it too obvious with how and why. It shows that I'm getting tired here. But anyway, let's say that I type something. This is a question here, no question mark. Oh, that is weird. Is it that smart?
It was more comments got turned into questions, or if it came after someone said something. There was a thread of a few of us posting things. This is a comment, this is a question, and was getting most of them wrong.
I see. Okay. Well, I mean, so far it's been doing pretty well for me here, but you can always turn it on or off. See, this was not tagged, and by clicking on it, it just turned into a question that gets people's attention. And if somebody else were to go to this page right now and click on classroom, and then on that question mark, the counter would be incremented. Maybe somebody can do that, one of the people who is here on there right now. So click on the word classroom, and then it shows this is a question. And if you click on the question mark, it'll increment the counter. So I don't know if any of you is on Perusall right now, but you may want to do it. Otherwise, there we go. See, so one other person want to know the answer to this question. This means that if there's a follow-up, it'll get answered. At this point, I don't think I can unclick it anymore. No, I can no longer unclick it. But you have control by clicking on that question. So you can always override the system. And then for answers, my clever answer, I cannot upvote my own clever answer, but somebody else could click the gray, there we go. And then it gets marked as not only answered, but also upvoted. Does that answer your question, Theron? I don't know exactly what went wrong. If it's systematic, then please report it to support@perusall.com.
Okay.
Anyway,
I think yes, that's the way we're having the conversation, but yeah, thank you. That helps.
Great. So essentially, that's how I prepared myself. That's all I did to get ready for this session. So the last category that I want to discuss before we have a free-flowing discussion. I know we were scheduled. Did we say 60 minutes or 90 minutes? I don't remember. Because I've given too many webinars here, I guess. But I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the technology. There were questions in these 4 categories. Oh, sorry, not analytics, LMS. That's what it's the wrong header there. So David Ladle said, does anyone have experience with requesting to add a textbook to the adopted list? Does it take days, weeks, months for the approval process? Can publishers decline? And is there a charge for students? So, one is, I think that if it's a textbook from a publisher with which we already have an agreement, it goes fairly quickly. And this process used to be very painful because publishers were very, suspicious of Perusall, but we now have a tremendous number of publishers on board. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, let's briefly go back to Perusall, and let's go to the course here, and I go to library, and let's say I want to add content. You can add content from the book catalog. This is what David's question deals with, but you can also add a web page, or you can add documents, which could be a PDF document, a Word document, an EPUB document, an HTML document, or computer code, which then also gets syntax, highlighted automatically. Or it can be a video or a podcast. So there are many different files that you can do. All of those are free. There's no cost for that. If it's a book from a publisher, then unfortunately the publisher will want a fee for that. As you can see, we have about 330,000 books from a very large number of publishers. And if the book that you need for your course is not there, then you can request a title that's not in the catalog. That's what David is referring to. So you need to put in the title, the authors, the publishers, and the ISBN. So I don't have an easy answer there, because it depends a little bit on the publisher. Ultimately, it's the publisher who decides whether or not we're allowed to sell their book. Michael, do you have any sense for that?
I'm sorry, Eric, sense of
the how long it takes typically to get a title that's not in our catalog?
it can take 24 hours, depending on how cooperative the publisher is. It doesn't take very long.
Yeah, but if the publisher is not cooperative, it can take forever.
It can take a while.
Yes, but you know, it helps if we both work on that. So in other words, if you let us know, we can go to the publisher and say, hey, we have people who are interested in using this book in Perusall. And if you go to the local rep or you know, the publisher and say, I would like to use this book. For example, you know, one of my former students, actually, Angela Duckworth, you may have heard of her. She is the author of the book Grit. Very much would like to use her book in which is a Simon & Schuster book, and you know, we did not have an agreement with Simon & Schuster, but finally that is now happening because she worked on it and we worked on it. So incidentally, I said Perusall is free. That's completely true. So how do we work then? Well, when we sell a book, let's say that somebody adopts Tino the tortoise here, and you can see here the reflowable text is $16.99. If you select that title by clicking this button, as soon as Perusall verifies that you're a bona fide instructor, then you have access to the book. But your students, when they go to Perusall, they will have to pay $16.99 for the book, and we get a small commission on that book, which keeps which pays the bills for serving and user support and so on. So that's how Perusall keeps running. But everything else, from video to PDF to whatever you want to upload, is free. By the way, this book is $16.99. Other books will have a very different price, like this one, for example, $105. I mean, we have no leeway in determining what the prices are. That's the publisher that decides it. But overall, we've been able to negotiate really good prices. My own book, Principles and Practice of Physics, initially, you know, it's $280. The publisher wanted the same prices for a new printed book, totally crazy. But now I think, I don't know what it's come down to. Let's see. I think it's 50 or so. Let me type my first name too. Oh, I guess it's just my last name. Where is my book? There we go. So $48. So the price has come down significantly from $280. So I think that's a very good development, because textbook prices have been going through the roof. So going back to my slides, I hope that answers David's question. I want to briefly discuss this question by Melinda Yang, which, as I hear, was also a topic of discussion in one of the breakout rooms. Can students upload their own PDFs and create groups? I can see group students benefiting from this, where each group has their own paper and need to collaborate with each other and help each other understand the paper. Often they find it difficult to voice to others in the group what they don't understand, and they're just silent. I wonder if this would help those students speak up. I find in general that Perusall helps students speak up. I find that online, very different students are vocal than in the classroom. It's a great compliment to each other. But back to Melinda's question, the answer is no. I want that feature too. So I think I emailed emailed Melinda, write to support@perusall.com and ask this as a feature. If you have a feature request, just email it. I have many ideas for features, but I mean, we have to select we have to be careful with our efforts. We're a small team, and this past year we've added almost 1 million users, so there were a lot of logistical support issues. But we now have a really good team, and we can finally turn our attention again to features. So ask for features. I've asked for a number of features. This is one of them. I'd be thrilled if some of you emailed support@perusall.com. Peggy said, does anyone have suggestions for the time? I don't know the answer to this question, so I would love to hear. Does anyone have suggestions for the types of videos that work best with this tool? I'll be teaching a spring course in a subject that has lots of documentaries, and wonder if some of you have experience with this who could provide suggestions. So I have to tell you, initially, I resisted video. We added this feature at the beginning of the pandemic. As we went online, I all of a sudden was thinking, how am I going to do my class online? I think I want to put some videos online. I need to put that video in Perusall. So I went to Brian, my former postdoc, who's now the CEO, and I said, let's get this feature online, and I'd resisted video for the following reason. I was thinking, video puts the viewer back in a passive mode, right? You become sort of a sponge for the information that comes at you at a rate that's not controlled by you. And most students, when they look at video online, put the playback speed at 2.0, get through it as fast as you can. And then when we unveiled the video feature, what I noticed was that the social interaction slowed people down. You watch a video, you click to post an annotation, it stops the video, or you interact with other people. So this whole, annotation layer, rather than allowing students to speed up the video, slows it down. And I was blown away by the amount of interaction in the video. Having said that, now that we have this feature, I don't have a good answer to Peggy's. And I don't know how many of you have experimented with video on Perusall. I would love to hear from you. Raise your hand or just unmute your microphone, and please introduce yourselves to others. Who has some insights on what videos work best? Short videos, long videos, or any other video related question?
This is Janine Fitzgerald from Durango, Colorado, and I used YouTube videos, I used documentaries, I did my own little videos talking about specific topics, and the students seemed to really like them, and they commented on them, and it worked really well. I was pretty excited about the video part.
Oh, that's great. So you actually used documentaries.
Yep.
How long were they?
An hour.
Wow, that's
Most of them. I only
significant.
used one of those. The other ones were shorter.
I see. Well, thank you. That's really good to hear. Anybody else who has a comment to make on the use of video?
Yeah, I'm Cynthia from Holy Cross, and I teach Russian and Soviet history. And so I show all kinds of short films, but it's all about sort of analyzing the Soviet perspective. So like there'll be a Soviet cartoon from the 1960s portraying America or something like that. And so this is a wonderful tool. I mean, I have to say, I do encourage them to watch it once all the way through, and then to go back to post and answer comments. But it's a great way to do a lot of legwork before discussion, to get them to think about perspective and symbolism and how certain effects are achieved. I also find students these days are not only, not terrific at close reading, but they're very unsophisticated a lot of times in like understanding a video as a craft and as a way, that of eliciting responses. And so they need to be kind of taught to sort of see it as something they can deconstruct. And this was a great tool for that.
That's wonderful to hear. So I am going to go to the next, because I want to be sure that in the next few minutes we stop. So I have until 4 o'clock, so I'll stay online as long as you want until then, because then I have to go to answer a question. Monique Chaufin said, turning now to grouping, sectioning of students, what exactly is the ideal virtual class section? Is it possible to view who is in what section so that the same students might be put together in a synchronous session? And Patricia Gonzalez Flores said, I'm intrigued how the grouping works. If I'm expecting a big group, but don't know yet the number of students that will show up, how can I configure the course? And Kazuko Hiramatsu said, do you have any thoughts on ideal group size so that engaging with the comments doesn't become overwhelming? This is a comment I hear often from students for asynchronous online discussion and wonder if something similar happened in Perusall. And then Mark Welborn asked a related question to the one Patricia asked, Monique asked, can the instructor establish the groups? So in the article you read and in the research that Kelly did for her thesis, we found that if you have let's say a course of 700 people and you let all of the students loose within minutes, the whole page is one big annotation and there's no real estate left to annotate anymore. And as a consequence, students are forced to add to existing annotations. So the thread length grows, but the quality of the discourse goes down because it gets influenced by other annotations rather than students revealing their own questions. On the other hand, if it's very sparse, let's say that you have only 4 students, there are not that many long threads because each student posts their own questions and there are fewer interactions. So as a function of the group size, what you find is that both the quality and the thread length increase initially as the group size gets larger. And then the thread length continues to grow as it gets larger and larger and larger because students run out of space to add new annotations, but the quality goes down. And we found, although that was done on a prototype platform that was a little bit different from Perusall, we found that the optimum group size was somewhere between 20 and 40. So let me go back to Perusall for a moment so I can actually show what I did. So I had no idea how many people would sign up. And when I set up the course, I'll go to course setting here. For grouping, I said that there would be 100 people. And I set the group size large because I was assuming not that many people would do the pre-course assignment. So that means that Perusall divided the class into 2 groups. Now, more than 100 people showed up. So that means that the group ended up being larger than 50, which is probably not optimum, okay? So the closer you can get to the actual enrollment, the better. By the way, to answer Mark Welburn's question, yeah, I can manually assign, right? So you can do that either by uploading a spreadsheet or doing all kinds of shortcuts here, or you can say, okay, I want this person in that group and that person in this group, and and then save the changes, which I'm not going to do, because then you would all of a sudden, I would certainly break all of the existing discussion threads. So from your end, if you were to open the article, you would see a different view from the one I see. Let's wait for the annotations here to load. I see a pretty dense distribution. Luckily, there's still some real estate left. And that's because I've selected all the comments here. I could select a specific group. There are just 2 groups. Let me select group 2, and I see fewer. This is probably what half of you see this view, and the other half see group 1. I can also look for a specific students. This is not something you can do because those are instructor choices. You can, however, select no comments, in which case it's completely clean, so that you can read without the distraction of the annotations. Or you can say, I only want to see unanswered questions, or only questions, or only unread comments. So those are things that you can do. So I would say, try to estimate the enrollment as accurately as possible. If you don't know exactly and it works out bad, you can always change that later. It will confuse students in the beginning a little bit because students that they were seeing in their group might all of a sudden not show up anymore. The system tries to handle that as best as it can, but it's certainly not perfect. And I would probably urge you to, or recommend to you, to have a group size somewhere between 20 and 40. And personally, I find that in my classes, larger groups tend to create more engagement than smaller groups. But if anybody wants to comment about their own experiences, I saw some people say that they made groups of 5 or 6. Seems to me on the small size, but if that works, great. So the final thing, I think, going back to my slide and see we're almost done here, has to do with scoring. I'd be very clear on finding out more about the grading. I already talked about that somewhat. For those of us who are skeptical of algorithms, machine learning, are there ways to coerce the system only for percent? Of course, you have to define what completion is. On the one hand, it's classes like mine in which it would be encumbered by the sheer number of posts. On the other, the algorithm seems to yield inaccurate evaluations. And often I end up having to do a lot of manual grading. Okay, so the research, which is not in the paper that you read, there's another paper on the grading algorithm, shows that yes, on individual annotations, the interpretation, I presume that Aranzazu is referring here to the content scoring mechanism, not the more holistic one. So if you go to your course settings as an instructor, and you may not see that as a student right now, but I'll give you the opportunity to upgrade to an instructor account in just a second, and you click on scoring, you can see that there are several ways of scoring. One that says annotation content only, which used to be the default until I think last summer. Until last summer. And I think in September, we switched it over. And the other one is holistic. So the annotation content only uses machine learning to look at the content of the annotations. And while for a large number of annotations, the accuracy is as great or even a little bit better than inter-rater reliability, on one individual annotation, it's never as accurate as the human mind, right? So the human mind is very good at accurately evaluating, small number of annotations, what full reading and interpretation of the text, right? Well, I mean, if I read your annotations carefully, I can tell almost by gut feeling, oh, this person was really engaged and that person was not. So essentially, the way the machine learning algorithm works is by having a person manually grade a large number of annotations and then using that as a training set for a machine learning algorithm. And then you can show that on a new set of annotation, the machine is more accurate at following that individual than another human being because it's partially subjective, right? But after the appearance of that article that you read, we decided that there are other metrics that are much more important. And to answer, who was asking a question about the scoring? Spencer said, for those who are skeptical of algorithms, machine learning, just move this all the way to 0. And then it uses other metrics like, reading time, and you can set these settings, you know, how long time is spent active reading or how many annotations there were. You can set that to your heart's content. I highly recommend using holistic, which is what I use in my classes, which is a combination of some of the annotation content so that they don't just put in garbage, and then uses all these other metrics that have shown to correlate with better in-class performance. So that would be my recommendation. How do I explain that to the students? So I say, look, you know, I read early. I mean, do what is best for learning, not what is best for a score. And I try not to reveal too many details because that only encourages them to game the system. But let me tell you, this is really hard to game. That's what the great news is about our current approach. So LMS integrations, it's fully integrated with oh, by the way, that was one of the comments by Amanda. I asked, can different algorithms be established for varying types of assignment? You can make some small changes, but the overall grading scheme is set for the course, unfortunately. But that would be a great thing to ask as a future feature. So maybe you want to email support@Perusall. And then Shimene, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, Getchevich says, I had several students who seemed to be looking for a way to game the system. They kept asking for specific information about the scoring. Any suggestion on what we can do in this situation? Well, I essentially tell them very much the same thing I told you. And also I try to minimize the impact on the final grade. Right? If you give a very strong, if I told you, you know, your salary raise for 2020 depends on your annotations for this webinar, you would have done everything in order to, you know, maximize your score, including maybe copying parts of Wikipedia in the annotations, which is not very conducive to the quality of the interaction that we have now. So do the same thing with your students. Don't make it high stakes, make it extremely low stakes. So it's fully integrated. We had that comment that I read earlier about Blackboard. It can be integrated with any LTI compatible LMS. I run it through Canvas, which means for the students, it's just part of Canvas. They click on an assignment, it jumps. They don't need to sign on to Perusall, nothing. And then the grades from Perusall, if you use them, automatically filtered into the Canvas gradebook. You don't have anything to do. And the same thing with Moodle or Blackboard or whatever. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up so that people who need to go can go, and then I'll be happy to answer question. Let's reflect on what we've done here. You did an asynchronous preparation, which permitted us to use this time to our maximum benefit here by addressing your questions rather than me doing what I think would be useful, but might not be useful to you. And then we used that synchronous time to address these points that were important. And finally, this doesn't end here because you can continue to profit, hopefully, from this webinar. In fact, some of you may not have noticed that, which is why I want to highlight that. If you go to your course, you can see in the library, which you can access by going to course home and then library, or either by looking here in the sidebar, but the best is to go there. You can see that there are the two things that I had assigned, but there are many other resources here. The first one is instructions on how to upgrade to instructor status. So if you made a student account, you can see here how to upgrade to instructor. You can find a reference for support and another paper on the importance of, or lack thereof, of lecturing. And finally, I put a lot of other resources, video and papers on the use of Perusall in lots of different classes: biology, case-based law, political science. So hopefully some of that will serve as inspiration for you to implement Perusall in your own courses. So the instructions to, okay, so the instructions for upgrading your account, I'm not going to, or maybe that somebody from the Perusall staff can copy this code into the chat. So you just enroll in a course and then enter that code, and that will automatically upgrade you to an instructor. So that's it. We have a, thanks to a Perusall user, this is nothing to do, this is not an initiative from Perusall. We have a Facebook user group, and within days, because I think the group is only a week old, we already had, close to 100 users who joined. So I made a quick short link to that, bit.ly Perusall user group with the first letter of each word capitalized and no spaces, of course. So you can join that user group. And if you want a resource sheet about additional information on how to flip your course online, you can find it in that handout. But you will get an email that has all this information too. And I'd love to hear, I hope you will stay in touch. This was wonderful to interact with you. I know many of you have to go, but I'll stay here at least another half hour to answer questions. So thank you so much. I hope this was useful for you. It was certainly useful for me to help articulate my own thoughts. I mean, we all know that, right? Who's the person who learns the most in any classroom? It's a teacher. And I find that each time that I give this webinar, I sort of solidified my own, ideas about teaching and about how to use asynchronous interaction before a live synchronous interaction like this one. So thank you very much for your attention. And please stay around. If you have any questions, raise your hand in the participant list and I'll take people in order. Thank you so much and be well and keep in touch.
Eric, I sent you a question through Slack.
You sent me a question through Slack?
Yeah, that came up in the chat.
Doesn't it? Okay, so I have a question about groups. Does an instructor comment show up for all groups no matter what? Yes, the answer is yes. Does it show up only for a specific group? If you, that's actually a good question. I don't know the answer to that. So let's say that you send it to a specific student. We need to ask Brian. I don't know. Can you quickly ask Brian and see if we get a response to that before the webinar is over?
Will do.
Okay, great. And then interrupt me if you get the answer. I saw Jasmine had her hand up, but it went down again.
That was actually the question that I had, though.
Oh, okay.
If I have the floor, I do have one other question.
Absolutely, Jasmine.
So I used Perusall for the first time this fall when I was teaching completely asynchronous online. And I think I have, I'm sure I'll find some sympathy here with people, but I found this semester just completely overwhelming with, I teach a 4-4 load. I've got 2 small children at home. And so one of my problems was that I ended up having to kind of abandon my students to Perusall. I could not interact with them as much as I wanted to on there. So as I prepare for the spring, and hopefully getting a little bit more ahead of things so I don't fall behind, I'm wondering if people have some ideas about the best ways to integrate things from the confusion report, or questions that come up in Perusall, assuming I'll have more time to check in with them. One thing that had crossed my mind was maybe building in time every couple of weeks into my lectures, leaving those open to create new content based on that feedback I'm getting in Perusall. But I was wondering if this great group of people had some other ideas.
Great. Well, before other people pitch in here, Jasmine, I hear you completely. I mean, this was a very overwhelming semester. In fact, it was a very overwhelming year. In fact, the summer sort of slipped away without, being a real break. I was taking courses on online teaching and on pedagogy and running 2 courses. And then I was running a series of webinars, and our faculty meetings continued through the entire summer. And now this fall has been relentless, given that, everything is on Zoom, social life. And so it's been, I completely hear you. And I think I'm going to sleep through the holidays because I'm really totally exhausted after this semester. And I also got behind, and over the summer, see, when I moved my class last spring in the middle of the semester from in-person to online, I very much followed what I'd done in the classroom. So using Perusall for asynchronous pre-assignment, and then in the class I was teaching through questioning, peer instruction essentially, and I did that online using breakout rooms, and it worked beautifully. But then over the summer I thought, you know, why am I doing so many things synchronously? Right? I mean, if you stop to think about it, most of education is a synchronous enterprise. And synchronous was even worse. It's not just synchronous, it's with the pace set by the instructor, rather than asynchronous and the pace set by the learner. Right? So in a sense, we're teaching, we're treating education as a conveyor belt with all of the students moving at exactly the same rate. And as we know, that's not how learning works. Learning is not a linear, you know, steady process. So I actually came to the conclusion over the summer that I should make as many activities as possible asynchronous. And exactly the same thing happened as you said, Jasmine. First of all, I relied very heavily on Perusall. Luckily, my students actually reported very positively on it. I don't know if you have, what feedback you have received, but yesterday I was talking to one of my students. That's anecdotal evidence. I really need to collect data rather than anecdotal evidence. But she said that she loved Perusall, and she loved seeing that she was not the only one who was confused about certain things. But I lost the connection that I had in my workshop here today, right? Because in my workshop today, what I did was I went over your questions and then I addressed your questions here. I lost it in my classroom. And, you know, so over the break, I'm going to think a little bit about how to restore that. Now, for next year, there's no problem, because what I can do is I can go over the questions that the student posted this year, and they're not that different one year to another, from one year to another, right? It's same thing with these webinars. I've run now quite a few webinars, and it tends to be the same type of questions that come up. You know, how do I motivate the students? What kind of work do I need to do? How does the scoring work? How does the grouping work? I mean, it's pretty similar. So I think that what I'm going to do is, even if I cannot use the questions from the exact cohort that I'm teaching, previous cohorts of students can inform what I'm going to do in the future. Not ideal. Maybe I'll come up with something, but I would love to hear if somebody else has thoughts on this issue. So feel free, since we have three people. Siri, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to jump in. It is an idea that came up earlier in the chat, and I don't know if that person's here. I didn't see their name raised, but they talked about, and I thought it was just a brilliant idea. So if you go in the chat, I don't remember who it was, but this is not my idea. But they said that they had Perusall managers, and they would assign students to combine those comments and then to report back, so that they were essentially like doing that kind of collecting work, which I just thought was a fantastic way, because then the students themselves could really become part of that kind of learning and becoming a kind of authoritative around the material themselves by being able to kind of put the material together. The other thing that I end up doing is that I found that rather than coming up with questions in some of the readings that I did, is that I had in PDFs that were more complicated. I was teaching a lot of theoretical readings to students who had never read theory. I ended up in another, like a PDF writer, I drew lines on the paragraphs that I really wanted them to pay attention to. And I might like do a little summary on the side, like pay attention to what Marx is saying here. You know, why is he making this claim, that we're outside of Perusall, but then I load that document in Perusall so that they had some scaffolding to be able to, but then what it meant is that it took me a little bit of time, but it then meant I was fairly kind of hands-off in Perusall. I just let that be their space, which it sounds like Eric was suggesting he's found to be the most effective way, is by letting students run it. So those were some ideas that, especially the one, I think that Perusall manager thing, like I said, again, whoever said that idea, I am definitely filing that one away.
I really, really, really like that. I'm going to, I teach a large class. I have a number of teaching assistants. So I think that that's a great idea. So you triggered another thought about the boxes and highlighting. So I heard from an instructor at the University of Michigan, I think he's a material scientist, who actually doesn't just upload the readings, he uploads a separate PDF file that is a reading guide, where he essentially tells students, you don't have to read the whole article or the whole chapter or whatever, but I want you to pay particular attention to this and this and this. Maybe that's another idea. I also since we had the video feature, one of the things I did, I think I commented in one of the two assignments. Yeah, earlier today. I had follow-up videos, and I put those in Panopto in Canvas rather than in Perusall. I was very disappointed at how little the students looked at those follow-up videos. And maybe it's because they already got enough out of the reading and interaction with each other. Maybe I should have put a video as an introduction to the reading. It's one of the things I'm still somewhat playing with. Anyway, Jasmine, I hope that addresses it. I certainly have an idea here. Perusall manager. I think I'm gonna see if I can get one of my teaching assistants to help me wade through Perusall. Thank you, Siri, for pointing that out. Paula, you're next in line.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for all this webinar, and thank you to all the participants for all the comments and helpful hints. I just had a couple questions. One, I wrote on the assignment, and it was about active reading time. I was a little confused. I didn't use the grading. First of all, I didn't use the grading feature, but I did go to the student report to see, if the students had been engaged and how much they had been engaged just previous to class to have an idea. So sometimes the active reading time was really too little to what I could see that they had done, because I could see that there were comments, they had engaged, they had been there, and maybe the active reading showed 10 minutes. So that was a little confusing. And then my other question was about the conversation and hashtags features that I just discovered. I didn't use them either, but I wonder if you could tell us.
The hashtags.
Yes, and
yeah, I found out about the hashtags through one of my webinars because somebody asked questions, and I never used them, and I still have not used them. So just so people know what what Paula is referring to, let me quickly share the screen here. So at the beginning, you can see hashtags, logistics. Oh, but these are all hashtags that have not been used.
Oh, I guess you can if you write a hashtag in your comment, then it appears.
Yeah, here, for example, Dora Pineda in Spanish makes a comment to Nicole and adds a hashtag usando Perusall. Let's actually see in my course. I know that last year, I have to go to Canvas to get to my course. I have to go to Canvas to get to my course, and I don't want to hop out of this right now. But let's see, I had another AP 50 course. Where is AP 50? Here we go. 2019. Let's see if my students used hashtags without me knowing it. Cycle. Interesting definitions. Look at that. So they use the term interesting definitions quite often. So if you use a hashtag, you can quickly find all the quotes that refer to that hashtag.
All right.
Equation.
So you don't have to pre-make the hashtags. If someone uses a hashtag, it will appear there.
Yes. Yes, as soon as somebody makes a hashtag. So going back to today's webinar here. So this hashtag, usando Perusall, was created when Dora
Right.
wrote this, and usando is another one. Oh, she used usando Perusall, but was a space. But I think everything, oh, here, ungraded. Yeah. So Matthew added the word ungrading here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so they automatically created.
Okay.
You had another question, Paula. It was a
It's about
two-part question.
The active reading time.
Oh, the active reading time. Yes, yes, yes. So you're right. Sometimes the active reading time, and I asked Brian about it, sometimes you have a student who has, 30 comments and 1 minute active reading time is just not possible. And he explained to me how that can happen. And unfortunately, it's very hard to correct. And I forgot what his answer was. But so there are ways that the active reading time can be inaccurate. Michael, do you happen to know?
No, what's the question?
But you know the answer to the other question that I asked you to find out from Brian.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So maybe I'll ping Brian and ask him about this active reading time while you explain that other question.
Ah, okay, got it.
What was the question about active reading time?
So the question about active reading time is that, so active reading time basically looks at when the browser window is in the front.
Yes.
And counts active reading time when the student has the browser window in the front and the computer is not idle. And I have seen, and Paula was pointing this out too, occasionally, it's not something that happens often, but occasionally you see a student who obviously has not been inactive, because there are many comments, but the active reading time is 1 minute. So
the active reading time is measured by any mouse movement or keyboard stroke that is generated every 2 minutes in that open screen. So as long as they do something in that 2 minute window, it'll be generated as active reading time. If they don't, it won't generate it as the active reading time.
I know, but there's a glitch whereby somehow on occasion, a student can have a very low active reading time, and I forgot what the reason is. And even though the student cannot have had that little active reading time.
So if they're running multiple open screens side by side and one is in the faded background, and they're not doing, like, let's say they have a Word document or something on the right, it won't register the open browser of the reading as active reading time because they're manipulating the browser on the right hand side.
Oh, I see.
Beautiful. So they're doing the reading, it's just they, instead of having it in one browser, they have the two separate. And so it's not.
Okay, thank you.
So I think that the take home message is, don't give too much weight to active reading time in any scoring you do. Okay, so next in line, I'm going down my list here. I have Chitu Okoli. Please unmute yourself.
Yes,
yes.
Thank you. Thanks for the great seminar. I've actually been using Perusall for about a year now. And before I used Perusall, I used to do reading quizzes. First of all, the first 10 minutes of class time. And then later on, I tried to move it out of class. Then I learned about Perusall and I switched quickly. So I don't do full flipped classrooms. I kind of do enhanced. I try to move reading outside of class so that class time can be used for more advanced presentations and actually more fun stuff. Rather than the more routine stuff.
Where do you teach and what do you
sorry,
teach?
I am at Schema Business School in Paris. I teach courses in information systems management and business intelligence, data mining. So those are the range of courses I teach. I have two issues. The second one is more serious, but the first one is that, so I'm Canadian and I was educated in the United States. I moved to France about 4 years ago, and I've had a bit of an academic culture shock. And it's not France in general, but part of it is just a French business school culture, very different from that in Canada that I was familiar with. But students are very reluctant to read. And I even use free readings. I don't use paid textbooks, so it's not even a matter of cost issue. It's just that a lot of teachers do not require them to read. And so I require North American levels of a couple hundred pages of reading through the semester. And I get a lot of kickback from the students. So I don't know if that's a particular situation, but so like when you, I've seen comments, you posted some, I've seen some on Perusall website, students saying that they love Perusall, it's social interactive. I don't get those comments from student feed. Maybe out of 100 students, I'll get 1 or 2. But then for that same number, I'll get maybe 10, 15, 20 complaining about Perusall. Why do you force us to read? We can read anyway, which of course they would not read if I didn't force them. So that's not even a question. But the fact they complain about this. So I was wondering if you have some, or anyone has some tips about how to persuade students who are in a culture that are not used to reading a lot, the value of that. I mean, I'm convinced, and I'm sure everyone here is convinced, that's why we're here. But how do we, I just appreciate some tips on that. That's my first.
I think that's a very, very good point. And, you know, change is so difficult. And you sort of highlighted the heart of the problem. The heart of the problem is most of your colleagues lecture, which is the biggest disincentive to, you know, getting prepared. I come from that culture because I was educated in Europe. And I was really surprised to find out that in the Netherlands, which is the country where I grew up, also in Paris, by the way, I come from a sort of international family. So part of my education was in Paris and the rest was in the Netherlands. And in both places, it was lecturing, and never any pre-class reading. Now, in the Netherlands, to my great surprise, in the last few years, there have been actually a number of institutions that have sort of institutionalized Perusall. I mean, I was totally impressed. So it is possible to change from a culture of, you know, not reading, not preparing and lecturing to one. You're in a difficult situation because of your colleagues to some extent, right? So, and I used to be in that same situation years ago when I first flipped the classroom at Harvard. I mean, students were not expecting to read it because in most science classes, the instructor was reading the textbook to them. And so I spent, and in my book on peer instruction, which I published in the mid-90s, I devote a whole chapter to motivating the students. Right? I mean, I think it's important to tell the students and to tell them that you would be very happy to read the book to them, but that there are better ways of using the time. And I also tell my students, look, you gotta read the book at some time. You can read it before coming to class to prepare yourself for class. You can read it after class in order to understand what happened in class, or you can read it 1 week before the exam in hopes of still passing the exam. It's gonna cost the same amount of time. When are you going to get the most benefit from it? I mean, that's just one example, but I found back then that I needed to spend considerable time explaining and motivating the reasons for coming to class prepared. And I think at some point the students did buy in. Did I win them all over? No. But if I just launched into this without motivating my approach, I met a lot of resistance.
Which book did you refer to, Luis?
Which book I used in my?
There's an entire chapter in one of your books.
Oh, in my book on peer, it's peer instruction, a user's manual. Okay. I mean, it's really more aimed at physics instruction, but I'll be happy to just email me and I'll give you the details.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me say something. May I interrupt for one?
Yes,
second?
absolutely.
There's my name is Aranza Suborrachero. I work at CUNY, City University of New York. There's a book written by a French thinker that you might want to check out. It's called, it has a French title that I don't know, but in English it's The Ignorant Schoolmaster. And it talks about, well, it tells the story of Jacques Otot, an 18th century teacher. And it's a very interesting story, but the commentary by Rancière, it's all about how explanation is, it equals talking down to students, because why are you explaining something they can read? It's the book says you're really telling them that they cannot understand it by themselves. And you can assign one chapter of that book for your students to read at the very beginning of the semester. And it's an interesting discussion to have with them.
The book is Le Maître Ignorant, 5 leçons sur l'émancipation intellectuelle. Very interesting. I didn't know about it. I'm very curious. I'll have some reading to do over the break.
What's the first part of the title?
Le Maître Ignorant.
Le Maître
Ignorant.
Thank you. Okay.
5 leçons. If you Google the ignorant schoolmaster, you'll find a Wikipedia article.
And you say, and thank you, Aranza. You said that chapter 1 might be a good one
yeah,
to
chapter 1. Yeah, well, take a look and find which chapter might work better for your students.
Thank you very much. I
in
appreciate
English,
that.
there's a PDF in the internet in English that you can download.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great.
Now,
well, I'm definitely going to have a look at it too.
Now, my second question is a totally different topic. So is this idea that, well, the automatic content grading with machine learning and all that with Perusall, this summer, I did a little experiment when I was playing with Perusall, trying to learn it better. And I had a test class. I had a few dummy students. And so I had a reading from one of my typical classes. But I used the students and I made annotations in Latin. I mean, I literally looked up a lorem ipsum website on the web and cut and paste Latin with lots of comments. And one of the students got 3 out of 3. The other got 2.8 out of 3 for posting Latin comments. One of them was flagged for plagiarism when I copy and pasted, but other than that, he still got 2.8 out of 3. So that suddenly made me feel that the annotation grade might not be much more than a word count.
Word count comes in, punctuation comes in. There are a number of things that come in, and it's definitely possible to game it. Now, if you had been in a class, if you had participated in this webinar and pasted Latin comments in Perusall, the other people here online would have thought, well, this Chito Koli is an interesting character, right? I mean, don't forget that the fact that this is public, right?
Yes, I thought about that. In a social context, it would be kind of weird.
Exactly. Of
course, if I posted in Japanese and there's no other Japanese students, but still, it would be kind of stand out.
Yes. So, but aside from that, I mean, that's why I also made the remark. I mean, I find holistic grading scheme works a lot better than the one that looks only at annotation content. And I would like to ideally get rid of any type of scoring and really focus on the intrinsic part rather than the extrinsic part. Now, in your particular situation, you may need to rely more on the extrinsic part because of, and therefore I totally understand the bind you're in.
Okay.
I see that we have one more question from Kyle, and Kyle, I have unfortunately a meeting to go to at 4. It's amazing that we're still here 2 hours later. If it's very short, I can probably afford to be late. So go ahead, Kyle.
Very short. Thank you very much, Eric. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm on the Perusall support team, and I wanted to address the active reading time question.
Oh, okay, Kyle. Thank you.
Thank you. So the active reading time may not be calculated by Perusall if the student isn't accessing the reading that's been assigned from the assignment tab. That is, if they're reading from the library tab instead of from within the assignment itself,
yes.
then the active reading will not be calculated.
Oh, yes, that's it. Thank you so much, Kyle. That's right. So you can access the reading either through the assignment or you can access it through the library. So, and I find that, so there's another thing. If you integrate Perusall in Canvas and the student goes to Perusall outside of Canvas, then the grades are not automatically imported back. So I have to tell my students, access the readings through Canvas. Right? Don't go outside. You only need to use one platform. No need to use 2 platforms. And the same is true with accessing the readings. Do it through the assignment, not through the library. Maybe eventually figure out a way to avoid those. Anyway, thank you all so much. It was great. I mean, happy to follow up. I'll send an email with some notes, and I'd love to hear about your experiences. So I wish you a great ending of this very interesting, to say the least, year. I hope you all continue to be well, continue to be in touch, and I look forward to hearing about your successes with Perusall. Goodbye and be well. Bye-bye.